Thanks for coming back from coffee. Well, this is our 11 o'clock session, and we're going to have a keynote address by Charles Wilkinson. For those of you who don't know him, I'm sorry, I hope you get a chance to. There's a lot in his biography in the materials. You should read it. He's one of the more wonderful people you could ever meet, so I think you should do it if you get seen you have the chance. And he's going to give a keynote address and is be followed with a response by two council members of the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. And I will introduce them once Professor Wilkinson, is done. And the title of Charles' address will be The Original Ute Treaty and the Aggression of the State of Colorado. And so, without any more ado, I'd like to introduce our friend, Charles Wilkinson.
Well, good morning. We're sure glad all of you could come. I love the idea of this gathering and the way it's been put together. Kristen takes a whole lot of credit for that. I want to say I had nothing to do with the original meeting and so forth, but and probably some of you can think of an exception to this, but I at least haven't been able to think of another conference that I've been to that focuses on the history of one tribe, or in this case, three tribes of Utes. And I think it's a great way to go about picking up knowledge, and particularly here, because the experience of these tribes is so profound and fascinating and painful. Words you can apply to the history of maybe every tribe, but they are all different, and it's important for us to mark that down and to have the pleasure of working on the Utes for these 2 days. I thought the morning presentations were really useful in getting us started and providing good context. Some of what I'm going to say, since I'm putting together some of the history, is duplicative of what was said earlier. But I hope very much that these thoughts will be of some use to you. Modern tribal leaders, searching for the right word in terms of accuracy, not romanticism, often describe their tribes before the arrival of white people as rich. They use that word broadly to describe their whole lives, not just their economies, and it certainly applies to the Utes. The western slope of Colorado and a large part of eastern Utah made up the heart of the original Ute domain, but the Utes, great hunters and horse people that they were, traveled to this front range and beyond, and west to the Great Salt Lake area. The Creator, as the Utes know, did open the bag containing all the peoples of the world and place the Utes in the very best place. All the buffalo, the mountain buffalo, and the plains bison east of the Continental Divide, coupled with the elk, deer, bear, and moose, meant that the Ute country held more mammals than virtually any place in North America. The serviceberry and other berries were collected and stored in the sturdy baskets woven by the women. The yampa plant, a carrot-like tuber, graced many meals. The plentiful cottonwoods, the central Colorado River, and many tributaries flowed through Ute country. The cottonwoods were used for fuel year-round. Bear dance, as it does now, signaled the incoming spring and spurred hopes for a good hunt, and sometimes spawned young love. Sundance honored the dancers who seeked to receive medicine power and honored as well the long survival of the Ute community and the spiritual ties that bound them together. To be sure, the winters could be hard. The Utes, like all societies, faced problems with individuals who strayed. People were lost in battle with the Shoshone, other tribes, and, beginning in the 1600s, the Spanish. But the Utes held firm to their beliefs and their land. Their own sovereignty determined their internal affairs and external relations. They had the matchless freedom of true and full self-determination. Yes, they were rich as a matter of accuracy, not romanticism. Then the new nation began to stir. In the 1830s, the Willamette Valley drew the attention of American homesteaders. The Oregon Trail passed just north of Ute country. The discovery of gold in California in '48 was a magnet for one of the greatest migrations in human history. Connections between these western areas and the Ute land were made by boosters and sincere believers in the Jeffersonian ideal. With water, the soils of the Grand Valley, like the Willamette, could make an agricultural empire on the western slope. The San Juans, like the Sierra, seemed to hold vast deposits of silver and gold. The Mormons came west over the Mormon Trail and in the late 1840s settled in the Great Salt Valley. Chairman Kutch told us about how much they loved that Aboriginal country, and then how Brigham Young forced the removal of the Uinta band of Utes across the Wasatch Range to the Uinta Basin. By executive order of 1861, President Lincoln established the Uinta Reservation. The United States was wary of the Colorado Utes. It wanted to obtain Ute land, but it knew and respected the military strength of the Utes with their rifles, horses, and determination to hold their homeland. Ute representatives signed peace and friendship treaties with the United States in '49 and '63. Those treaties did not involve land cessions. Yet the United States was resolute. The early treaties were viewed as stepping stones to a comprehensive Colorado land treaty with the Utes. Each succeeding year brought more pressure from American citizens. While the demands for farmland remained fairly low, miners kept moving west toward from the Front Range, regularly finding good deposits. They insisted on access to more western mountain land, the mountain land of the Utes. By 1868, the time came for a land treaty. Treaties with Indian tribes are often stereotyped as one-sided proceedings where the United States, with its superior power, handed treaties to tribal leaders on a take-it-or-leave-it basis. The stereotype, though, is misleading. Often the tribes had leverage, and the amount of tribal leverage at treaty time depended on a variety of factors, including the time of the treaty, the nature of the tribal terrain, the quality of tribal and federal leadership, and the military capability of the tribe. Take the treaties of the Pacific Northwest in the mid-1850s. Isaac Stevens, the principal federal negotiator, was a bully who intended to get every last acre that he could. But the tiny reservations he negotiated for some of the Puget Sound tribes triggered the bloody Leschi War with the Nisqually and allied tribes. The word spread quickly on the Indian communication routes in the Northwest, and by the time Stevens negotiated with the Warm Springs, Yakima, Umatilla, Nez Perce, Salish, and Kootenai, and Blackfeet tribes, those leaders held out for substantial acreages with the implicit threat of combat on what was then the thin, far edge of American settlement, where the Indians outnumbered the whites still. Further, all the Northwest tribes insisted and let Stevens know that they meant it and that it was non-negotiable on the right to fish off reservation, quote, in common with, end quote, the American citizens. Those words in time shaped the post-World War II Pacific Northwest through the 50-50 split of salmon between the tribes and the Americans. So, too, where the era, relative military strength, and other circumstances allowed for considerable tribal leverage and large reservations. Examples include many of the pre-1830 treaties in the East, the Sioux and Navajo and Apache treaties, and the Ute. The Utes had terrific leadership in the years leading up to the 1868 treaty and during the negotiations. Ouray from the Uncompahgre Band was widely known and respected among the Americans, and even today is on any short list of leading Coloradans in history. Always neatly dressed, he cut a fine figure, well-spoken and quadrilineal in Apache, Ute, Spanish, and English. He was a man of intellect. His open, welcoming manner inspired trust among the Americans. Congenial as he was, Ouray was a tough negotiator. He methodically and persuasively talked through difficult issues. He knew the Americans had no appetite for military combat with the Utes. And he had a way, without threatening, of suggesting that his countrymen, so imbued with their cherished freedom bred by the tribe's wide open spaces, that his countrymen might be angered by anything short of an extremely large reservation. Fortifying this was one of his fellow negotiators, Nihagat, or Jack, the powerful and charismatic leader of the White River Band, the most unrelenting band. Athletic, wiry, and stern, Nihagat was a man of the hunt and the horse, a man of resistance, not compromise. The last thing he wanted was to be a farmer, which the United States was pushing on the Utes and other tribes. He wanted to include all of the Utes' hunting grounds within the reservation in the treaty and closely watched the maps of the negotiations as the negotiations wore on. Nihagat made sure that the treaty provided that no one except authorized federal officials could enter the reservation without tribal approval. This reservation would be for the Utes alone, and it had to be large. Everyone knew that Nihagat did not fear war. So the two Ute leaders were an enormously effective combination, coming to the negotiations with different styles and attitudes, but sharing and insisting upon a vision for the same kind of treaty. The 1868 Ute Treaty was stunning. It encompassed 16 million acres, almost 1/4 of Colorado. It ran 200 miles from the New Mexico line up to the Steamboat Springs area, not far from Wyoming. East to west, it extended 120 miles, starting starting at the Four Corners and including future towns such as Pagosa Springs, Gunnison, and Basalt. The tribes ceded to the United States potential mining areas in the mountains leading up to the divide from the west. But the 1868 reservation did include the Grand Valley and the San Juan Mountains. It was one of the greatest of all Indian reservations, along with reservations such as the Great Sioux Reservation, the western two-thirds of South Dakota and part of North Dakota and Nebraska, and the reservations of the Silex, 103 miles of the Oregon coast and 16 to 24 miles inland, the Nez Perce, 8 million acres, and the Navajo, 16 million acres. The miners never relented. In particular, rumors abounded that the San Juans held major silver and gold deposits. And paying no respect to the reservation's off-limits status, miners swarmed into the San Juans, establishing mining camps, even brushing aside federal troops that had been called in to maintain the terms of the 1868 treaty. Finally, the United States forsook its promise of permanent Ute ownership and gave in to the realities on the ground. The miners had already set up operations and they would keep coming. In 1873, Indian Affairs Commissioner Felix Bruno negotiated the Bruno Agreement, also called the San Juan Cession, that removed the mountain range, a total of 4 million acres, 1/4 of the reservation, from Ute country. The Utes were furious. To them, these mountains were prized hunting grounds, not mineral deposits. Yet change was coming, and it was not moving in favor of the Utes. Matters grew worse in 1876 when Colorado became a state. Now, the white citizenry and the press, which was hyperactive on the Ute issue, took a proprietary interest in Ute country. The reservation remained Ute land, held in trust by the United States for the tribe. But increasingly, Coloradans acted as though it was or should be Colorado land. In January 1879, Frederick Pitkin became the state's second governor. Pitkin was a flamethrower who whipped up anti-Ute sentiment with his cries, quote, "The Utes must go," end quote. He blamed fires in the mining camps on the Utes, although Western mining camps were plagued by fire from the beginning without any arson from Indians. Now Colorado was dominated by two camps, the Utes of long tenure and the newly arrived hardline Americans. The United States was losing its will to be an intermediary, to be a trustee and protector of the land, the treaty, or the Utes. Then, as if matters could get worse, in 1978, Nathan Meeker arrived as the anointed federal agent for the Utes. Founder of the Union Colony, the utopian communal farm society near Greeley, Colorado, Meeker was well-intentioned and idealistic in his desire to help the Utes. But they were the wrong intentions and the wrong ideals for Ute country. He believed to his core that it was best for the Utes to become farmers. Most of the Utes hated the idea, and Meeker and others made their feelings known, and Nichagat and others made their feelings known to Meeker in no uncertain terms. They were hunters and horse people, not sedentary agriculturalists. But Nathan Meeker plunged ahead and quickly set about putting his plan in place. Stationed at the White River Agency, Meeker decided to move the office 5 miles downriver from the mountains to good potential farmland in the valley. Nikagat objected. The agency should be in hunting country. With that and other of Meeker's actions riling up the White River Band, Nikagat, still adamant about protecting Ute rights, but knowing that no uprising would do the tribe any good, made strenuous efforts as an ambassador. Nikagat explained his concerns about Meeker to Colorado citizens and federal officials, and even traveled all the way to Denver on horseback to meet with Governor Pitkin, all to no avail. Tensions were high as the hot, dry summer of 1879 came in. Pitkin continued to blame every fire on the Utes. Meeker continued to offend tribal members by requiring them to address him as father. Then Meeker, anxious to plow as much land as possible to jumpstart the farming, decided to plow up land where some elders, Canala, and other people who had been giving Meeker the benefit of the doubt for a while. That's where they pastured their horses. Worse yet, Meeker planned to plow up a racetrack that young Ute boys loved. It was a perfect place to ride and race horses and live the culture. That was too much for Canala, an even-tempered medicine man. Excuse me, he confronted the federal agent and the two men broke into wrestling. Finally, Canala pushed Meeker out the open door and Meeker landed in a heap. The agent, unhurt but angry, sent out a momentous telegram to Governor Pitkin and the Indian office in Washington, D.C. Quote, "I have been assaulted by a leading chief, injured badly, want protection immediately." The War Department ordered troops from Fort Steele in Wyoming to be sent to the reservations. Nikagat feared trouble after learning that federal troops under the leadership of Major Thomas Thornburg had set up camp on Milk Creek, just beyond the northern border of the reservation. Nikagat mounted his horse and rode up to Thornburg's camp. The two men talked at length. Nikagat, who had helped negotiate the treaty and knew it cold, insisted that the language of the treaty did not allow entry by outsiders. Thornburg pointed to language that allowed entry by authorized federal officials and showed Nikagat his orders. Nikagat responded that in any event, there was no problem on the reservation and that the major should hold off. Meeker had not been injured and there was no need for action that might scare and incite tribal members. Thornburg was satisfied with the meeting, wiring his superiors that, quote, "have met some Ute chiefs here. They seem friendly. Do not anticipate trouble." The next morning they met again. Nikagat had developed a specific proposal. Thornburg should leave most of his troops north of the reservation line, come onto the reservation with 5 men, and make an assessment as to whether additional forces were needed. The major seemed agreeable. Nikagat rode back quickly and met with Meeker, urging him to support the 5-soldier plan. Thornburg did the same by a letter delivered to Meeker by a messenger on horseback. But then, probably at the insistence of his officers, Thornburg reversed himself and so advised Meeker by messenger. Nikagat, now filled with foreboding, climbed on his pony and rode up to the north edge of the reservation. There he found, as he knew he would, some 50 armed Ute soldiers in war paint in the hills above a large meadow overlooking Milk Creek. The Utes waited. At midday, they could see the long column of soldiers entering the meadow. Nikagat waved at Thornburg, and the major waved back. Wanting to confer with the American, the Ute leader slowly moved his horse down the open hillside of the meadow. A shot rang out. No one knows whose, and filled the meadow with noise and history. Nikagat called out to both sides, "Hold on, hold on," but it was too late. Shots from both sides rang out. Major Thornburg was killed immediately. The Utes kept the federal troops surrounded for 5 days, but then new government soldiers arrived and the Battle of Milk Creek was over. 12 U.S. soldiers died and 43 were wounded. The Utes lost 37 men. Back at the agency, other Ute men, learning of the government advance onto Ute land and harboring pent-up anger over the Bruno Agreement and all of Meeker's actions, charged the agency and killed Meeker and 17 other white men. They took Meeker's wife and daughter and a third woman hostage, holding her for 23 days. The 3 women initially reported that they had been treated well. Later, 2 of them said that they had each been raped once. The events, all taken together, inflamed Coloradans on both sides of the divide. Governor Pitkin, with telegrams out to the western slope, made it even worse. Quote, "Indians off their reservation, trying to destroy settlements by fire. They are game to be hunted and destroyed like wild beasts." Within just a few months, Ute leaders were ordered back to Washington, D.C. for hearings and talks. But now the Ute leverage was gone. To underscore the new relationship, the United States had sent some 12,000 troops to oversee and keep down the Utes. The terms of the so-called agreement that they signed were set unilaterally by the United States in a fashion responsive to the views of the governor of Colorado and most of the state citizens. In June 1880, Congress approved the agreement that obliterated the promises solemnly made in the Treaty of 1868 that forced Nikagat's White River Utes and Ouré's Uncompahgre Band to remove to the Uinta Reservation in Utah and left a strip of land 120 miles long and 5 miles wide along the arid southwestern part of the state as reservations for the Ute Mountain Utes and the Southern Utes. In 1882, Chester Arthur signed an executive order creating the 1.9 million acre Uncompahgre Reservation in Utah for Ouré's band. Since 1886, the Uinta and Uncompahgre reservations have been administered jointly and are often referred to as the UNO Reservation. Ute land and other rights were also battered during the first 3 generations of the 20th century. In the early 1900s, the Allotment Policy, which nationally reduced Indian land holdings from 140 million acres to 50 million acres, and which the mountain Utes were able to avoid, hit the northern Utes and the southern Utes hard. Though the tribes strenuously objected, allotment opened huge blocks of land for settlement by non-Indians, taking more than half of the land within each of the two reservations. In the 1950s, the main body of the northern Utes managed to beat back sustained pressure for termination, but the so-called mixed blood Utes were terminated. The northern Utes also signed a deferral agreement for its water claims, a transaction that handcuffed the Utes in the exercise of their water rights. Their trusted attorney, John Boyden, who urged the tribe to sign the deferral agreement, had a serious conflict of interest due to his undisclosed representation of Peabody Coal, which wanted Colorado River water at the time. The era from the 1870s through the 1950s had a few positive notes. The return of the 726,000-acre Hill Creek extension to the northern Utes, and land returns to the southern Utes and Ute Mountain Utes. But otherwise, that stretch of time, nearly a century, was harrowing for the Utes. It was bred of misunderstanding, of short-sightedness, and, say it, racism. Yet, there was something else very different. Many Utes, tribal leaders and plain tribal members, showed character, vision, and staying power during those terrible years. Certainly, Ure did, and so did Nikagat. About 20 years ago, I did some research on the Utes. Of course, I knew some things about Ure from the beginning. I knew nothing about Nikagat, but learning about him became one of the joys of my life. I vividly remember how it began, when I saw a photograph of him, then another. Later, I wrote that, quote, he was fierce. Photographs show a lean, leathery man with a hatchet of a face. Then I dug for every morsel of information about him that I could find. I marvel at his desperate attempts to avoid the war at Milk Creek. Imagine a skilled warrior willing to unleash lightning bolts at anyone threatening his people, also being willing and able to ride alone into the meadow on Milk Creek with guns on all sides to make a last-ditch effort to find peace with an American military man whom he dared to trust. Ure, Nikagat, on one level, they lost. On another, they displayed rare and eternal qualities for Utes to revere, and for all peoples, in all generations, in all places, to celebrate. Certainly, the legacy of the long lines of ancestors was a main factor that inspired the three tribes to engage in the revivals that they all created starting in the 1960s, and that we will examine and honor this afternoon and tomorrow. The basic structure of the revivals, born of cross-fertilization with each other and with tribes nationally, are similar. Now the three tribes are the principal governments within their reservations, and all three have built workforces of hundreds of employees so as to govern comprehensively. They intend to be societies that honor their language, culture, and tradition, and as well utilize the best of the larger society. Even as the highest court has callously turned on the tribes with crabbed opinions, the tribes have taken creative and bold actions so to actually increase year by year their real world sovereignty, their actual legal, political, and economic power. Counterintuitively, as their commitment to entrepreneurial ventures has risen, so has their commitment to language, religion, and culture. For all three tribes, the natural world is a place for sustainable economic ventures and for the sacred as well. For Indian people, then, history has never been history. The past, the good and the bad, is entwined with the present and brings to the present information, inspiration, and lessons. Put another way, perhaps the visions and sacrifices of Ure and Nikagat have ascended to their heights in the successes of the tribes of today and of the many tomorrows. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we'll follow this up with a response first by Ramona Eagle, Councilwoman for the Southern Indian Tribe. I misspoke earlier when I mentioned that she's from the Ute Mountain Ute. So, if you'd like to come up here, Chairman Ute.
Southern Ute.
Oh, you're Southern Ute, right.
With the story that Dr. Wilkinson presented, the history of the Northern Ute bands in Colorado is tragic. But it's also important to remember that there are three other bands who were not removed and make up the Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Indian tribes, which is the Weemanooch, the Mowatch, and Kapota. And we are continuing to be the Colorado's longest continuous inhabitants. The Utes' historical homelands cover the entire state of Colorado, as well as other parts of the surrounding states. Many of the Southern Utes, the Mowatch and Kapoti, traveled down to the state that's now called New Mexico. And we did a lot of trading there with many of the Jicarillas, the Taos people, and we were able to work well with some of the Indians, our neighboring Indians. Through the incursion of non-Indians, treaties and agreements, some which were forced upon us, the lands of the Utes in Colorado were then reduced to the southwest corner of our state. Even though our reservation is small, We are still here. The Utes are still here. Our history, Northern Utes history, Ute Mountains history, is Colorado's history. We continue to write our story for our children and our grandchildren. At Southern Ute, the ultimate location of our reservation proved to be valuable. Following the 1880 acts that removed the Northern Ute ban to Utah, our reservation was then again, as indicated, reduced to an approximately 15-mile wide strip in the southwest corner of the state. Thereafter, a law was passed in 1895 that ratified the 1880 Act and called for allotments on our reservation. Though those Ban Utes who refused to participate in the allotment process, generally the Weemanooch, Ute Mountain Utes, were relocated to the western part of the reservation and is now called the Ute Mountain Ute Reservation. For Southern Utes, we received allotments until April 1899, when President McKinley announced the completion of the allotments and the opening of the homestead by others. Like other tribes, the homesteading process resulted in much of our Ute lands. By the end of the homesteading in 1934, more than half of our reservation was occupied by non-Indians, and 1,000 more acres of surplus land was yet to be distributed. Even today, our reservation remains checkerboarded, as was indicated earlier today, by privately owned lands. Today, the Southern Ute Indian tribe continues to purchase lands within our exterior boundaries of our reservation, to try to go back and purchase these lands to ensure that our reservation will be kept whole. Ultimately, Congress confirmed the current boundaries of our reservation in 1984 through the passage of Public Law 92-290. Public Law 98-290. Little did our ancestors know that under our reservation lay vast oil and gas resources. By 1990, our tribe was heavily and directly involved with the development of these resources. The tribal leaders at that time, including the late Chairman Leonard C. Birch, positioned the tribe to take the advantage of the development by exercising our sovereignty. We now produce and we now own production and pipeline companies operating on the reservation as well as off the reservation and across the country and into the Gulf. As a result of our strong leadership, the tribe is a leader in Indian country and an economic powerhouse in southwest Colorado. We are the largest employer in La Plata County and the only Indian tribe with a AAA credit rating. Our history has led us to our present success. While some chapters of our history are hard to revisit, it is the strength and courage of our people, our leaders, that ensure those chapters will be followed by success. Our current tribal council honors and respects the history, and we strive each day to uphold the responsibility that was placed upon us. My mother tells of stories that she hears from her grandmother about the Utes. She talked about the northern Utes, how they were in this area. And she talked about the Ute Mountain Utes were in the middle area, and Southern Ute was at the south end of Colorado and into the New Mexico area. She talks about what the Indian name for the Ute Mountain Utes were, and they are called the Elk people because they were located in the mountains, and there was a wealth of meat that they had for themselves. And the Ute Mountain people were called Weenooch, and that means old people. And I asked her about our Southern Utes, and she was like, we're Kaponi Mawach. But we also did a lot of trading with the Navajo and the Hickoryas. Sometimes, and I've heard this from some of our elder people, was the fact that we would sell our horses to the Navajo people, and in the midnight we would go back and gather up those horses and bring them right back. So some of the things that, they did were very powerful, and they made good judgments on that. Other stories she told me about was the renegades that were on the east side of the state. And she actually said they were the ones that were, of the Utes, were the ones that were part of our band, the Mawach. And they were the ones that were killing the Anglo people. And Chief Buckskin Charlie, when they came to the reservation, he told them, he said, go over that way to the west and stay over there, because if they find you guys here, you've been doing, shooting and killing, then they're going to blame all of us. So the people went west, and those are the people who are in the White Mesa area. She talked about, and does talk about the horse, how it was a beneficial thing for the Utes to hold. They were actually one of the most first tribes who had the horse from the Spanish people. And she said that the northern Utes must have been very powerful because they knew what resources were in the mountains. And she said they kept the Arapahoes, the Sioux, out of that country. And Weemanooch, they, with their horses, kept the Kiowas and Omaha Utes, or Omaha tribes, out of the state of Colorado. And we kept basically the Navajos and those who traveled from the south out of the state of Colorado. So the horse was very important to the Ute people. In fact, there was stories that said that the horse was more important than our children, that we would trade away our children for the horse. But that doesn't happen anymore. I have 3 horses, so I didn't trade them away. But I did tell my my son-in-law, who's Anglo, you owe me some horses for my daughter. I'm still waiting. Although they have given me 4 grandsons, which I'm very proud of. One of our ceremonies, the bear dance, is the longest continuous ceremony of the Utes. We always listen for the thunder, the first thunder, because that tells us it's time to bear dance. It's time for renewal of life. It's time for getting together once again and being happy and celebrating spring, celebrating what Mother Nature has for us out there. So when you ever hear the first thunder, remember the Utes, because that's what we always wanted to remember, was that first thunder. And today we make our children stretch. Say, stretch, because it's important that they remember those stories too, that our grandparents and our ancestors have given to us. So, thank you.
Well, Chairman Eagle, I'm Navajo, and after that horse story, I feel less bad about going to use your IHS clinic growing up, not going to Shiprock. So, our last response will be from Manuel Hart, Chairman Manuel Hart, or Chairperson, sorry. And I got to know Councilmember, Hart, when I was working in the National Congress of American Indians about 7-8 years ago, and he was always working in the committees that I would work with, and he was always the guy who helped me a lot, who gave me a lot of direction for our work, and was always very available for staff, and always a great national leader. So I think it's a real privilege to introduce him today.
Mike, good to hear from all of you. Which the way I found that one Perokan. I always tip China Mamuricatio, who want no quite my new Chitigaikane. I always tip China, who find my new Chinuruach, my mouth to Shumaika, who pardon Nakane, Chichiru must not try. So Uron so like boom, to which the way up, to which the way new way, that one Perokan. Mamus, the near Guacham, my new Chiguat no quite the guy can. Uron so like Muniru to which the way. Thank you. As I talked to my tribal members, my relatives, I said it's good that we share what hardships that the Ute tribes as a whole have gone through in history. Hardships from our kids to all of our members. It's good that we come here to talk about what's going on, to educate people, the non-Indians, to where we are, where we came from, to where we are today, to where we're going into the future. As is mentioned in your conference here, the legal past, present, and future of the Ute tribes. So I'd like to say that, and I'd like to thank Daniel. As he mentioned, I used to work with them at NCAI. My name is Manuel Hart. I'm a member of the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, current tribal council member, former chairman, been on the tribal council for 16 years. I'm married, my wife is Marie Hart, and I'm honored today to be here. This idea came out of Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs about a year ago, upstairs when we had our meeting. So a few of you were here at that time, and we said we need to educate, bring out what is not written in history. History too much is one-sided sometimes, and only the good is told. As Charles mentioned, that sometimes the bad is not told, and he told the history of Meeker, and what happened up there, and what happened to the Uinta Array tribe. Today I want to start my presentation that history is very important, that how it is told might have a disagreement, because there's always two sides to a story, from a non-Indian perspective or from others. It was inevitable, the coming of the non-Indian white people. They faced a lot of challenges during that time. My tribe, the Utes, they never had a written language per se, but they had a different process of recording events that happened, and the teaching of our children and family members was handed down by stories and telling things and writing something on a hide and saying this is the way people traveled and where they traveled and the different passes and how they're named. They looked at it from a visual side. As they mentioned that one time certain rivers were the boundaries and we shouldn't go on that side, that we protect our lands on this side. So you look at it from that perspective. 2,000 years ago, the Utes lived and ranged into the mountains and deserts over much of the Colorado Plateau, which is much of the present-day eastern Utah, two-thirds state of Colorado, northern Arizona, and northern New Mexico. Listen, listen, as it might seem that history repeats itself, as we, each of the presenters that come up here today and tomorrow, talk about topics and presentations that we each bring a piece of the story to all of you, that you may understand. First of all, I want to read the chronology of what's going on. And I want to go back to 1598. The Spanish trade begins with the Utes. 1640, the Moach and Capote bands probably acquired the horses from the Spanish and probably traded their kids for it. 1670, acquisition of the horse allows Utes to travel in larger bands. 1670, Spanish officials conclude first peace treaty with the Utes. The Spanish did. In 1821, Mexico gains its independence from Spain, and part of present Colorado becomes Mexican domain. In 1828, Robidoux builds Fort Uncompadre on Gunnison River in the heart of Ute country. 16 years later, Fort Uncompadre on Gunnison destroyed by the Utes. 1849, the first Ute First U.S. treaty with the Utes made at Abiquiu, New Mexico. Utes acknowledge U.S. authority while U.S. agrees to pay the Utes $5,000 per year to keep the peace. In 1850, the following year, the first Ute agency was established in Taos. In 1859, the Great Colorado Gold Rush begins. Boy, this really opens it up, the minds of people and what they want. In 1859, the Ute population falls from 8,000 to 2,000 due to disease and diminishing hunting grounds because of the gold rush. In 1868, which we talk about today, is the treaty. The Utes confined to western third of Colorado Territory by treaty. And in your program, it has a list of the treaty and all the different articles to it. In 1873, gold and silver rush occurs in San Juan Mountains. Same year, 1873, the Utes succeed San Juan mining area to United States, 1/4 of their remaining lands. Then it goes to what Charles was talking about. In 1878, Nathan Meeker named Ute agent at the White River. A year later, at White River Agency, Meeker and 11 others were killed by Utes. In 1880, Ouray goes to Washington, D.C. for treaty negotiations. That same year, he passes away at the age of 47. I think it happened as he was making a trip down to Southern Ute. In 1880, also, the Uncompadre, Yampa, White River, Grand River Utes were forced out of Colorado by Governor Pitkin. And he said and he used the media to do it, the Utes must go. In 1880, reservations established in southwestern Colorado for Southern Utes, a 15 by 100 mile strip of land. In 1888, U.S. takes more Ute lands, paying $50,000 to be divided among the Southern Utes, which included the three, Weenooch, Mowatch, and the Capote. Hunter Act repeals 1888 treaties and establishes permanent reservation as outlined by the 1880 treaties. In 1896, the land allotments distribution to Southern Utes. In 1906, the Antiquity Act, the agreement to trade with the Utes of Mesa Verde National Park for the land on the Utah border. 1924, American Indians become U.S. citizens. To me personally, I have a concern with that word citizenship. I was forced into citizenship. I'm a citizen now of the United States of America, but I'm not a citizen of the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. I'm a member of it. I'm enrolled with the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. The United States government, federal government, is trying to push to be a citizen, to assimilate you, to become one with them, so they don't have to fight us and argue with us of who and how, religion, your education, how you live, what you wear, how long your hair is going to be. All of these, is that civilization? Is that who we've become? As Utes, some of us were proud. We wanted to still keep that traditional living. So that's why I have a little bit of pushback from that citizenship. That was Congressman Kildee, that Chairman Kutch was talking about. You're a citizen of the United States, you're a citizen of the state of Colorado, and you're a citizen of your tribe. He always mentions that about the Constitution on the commerce, that sovereign nations are recognized as foreign nations, states, and Indian tribes. That's what he always brings to us when we go to NCAI. In 1937, Restoration Act returns 222,000 acres to Southern Ute. In 1930, 30,000 acres returned to the Ute Mountain Utes. 1940, Ute Mountain Utes adopt the Constitution. We're changing. Change is coming about to us. And it's looking where do we go? How do we do this? And things that concern me when I think of my people are what they had endured from how they once lived to how they live today. And to take a step back and look at it in depth. Things stand out. Change. Our president ran on that 4 years ago. Change. Native Americans had to really endure a lot of things. Not just Utes, but Native Americans overall. Today there's 566 tribes federally recognized. That's probably more a long time ago. But that change came with assimilation, as I mentioned. Education. New government. Healthcare. Water rights. Self-governance. Self-sufficiency. That's what the government wanted us to be, more self-sufficient through economic development. Laws. And we have to abide by certain laws. We're a federally recognized tribe. We follow sometimes federal laws. And if there's legislation passed, such as the Water Treaty settlement, then we also have to work with the state, because the state has water laws. So which one is overseeing the other pertaining to water rights? Then you have your tribal. And then tribes can match federal law or exceed it. So things were going on at that time. Non-Indians were coming into this country. They had things going on such as the Civil War in 1861. Mexican War was also going on. Mexico was looking for their independence from Spain. Then the Americans against Mexico once they got their independence. And then always in the middle of that, which they thought was American Indian Wars, which was told. Now the Utes, they had all this land, which was their Aboriginal land. Even before some of these states became a statehood, there was territories. Utah, Colorado, in August 1st of 1876, became the 38th state. Ulysses S. Grant was the president then. Gold discovery of 1858. People wanted to travel across. There was the Santa Fe Trail. Trains became more predominant. And when trains came, those things that the non-Indians wanted to do, and one of them was hunt the buffalo. And they nearly hunted the buffalo to extinction just to get a tongue. They sold hides. They got little things. As today, history repeats itself. When you see people, big game hunters, and they go out and hunt elk and deer, all they want is the horns, and they leave the carcass there. Today, history repeats itself again. New Mexico, or Utah, January 4th, 1896, became the 45th state. New Mexico, January 6, 1912, became the 47th state. Our members, as Councilmember Eagle mentioned, roamed all the way down to New Mexico, over by Tucumcari. On the eastern boundary of New Mexico, there's a lake called Ute Lake. And they have a history of Ute people going all the way down there in their archives, and even in the township there, in the city. Abiquiu, there's a mountain there. It's called Ute Mountain. Over by Monument Valley in that area, there's archive stuff in Arizona that the Utes roam to that area. There's archives that I will reflect on later, that the Utes were pretty predominant in their areas of their Aboriginal lands. Today, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe land base is 600,000 acres, and it still goes into 3 states, as originally a long time ago. We didn't include Arizona because I don't know if they want us in that area, but we did roam in that area that long time ago. I want to bring up one thing that really impacted us, as Charles mentioned Meeker. The Homestead Act. In 1862, during the Civil War, Congress passed during President Lincoln's presidency. It gave 160 acres, a quarter section of free land. And to be eligible for that, you must live on it for 5 years. You must plant crops, build a 10-foot by 12-foot cabin. That was the eligibility. Fact, 57% of them homesteaders made good of their claims. 600,000 patents on 80 million acres of what they claimed the government, what was public domain. That's when the tribes were forced into eminent domain. Their lands. Landowners in Colorado say, we are family, non-Indians, have owned this land for generations. 5 generations, 6 generations. But did they really take a look back and take into consideration the Ute people that were there before them? So I want to just read this thing on, it came out of, we had a Knowledge Bowl, I think it was called, last year at Fort Lewis College. And it talked about the Ute Mountain Ute history. And I took it out of that. But Weenooch history, land and resources, began when their ancestors inhabited their homelands as Utes. They shared their history with the Indians who lived in the Rocky Mountains, eastern and central Utah, and northern New Mexico. Their language indicates that they are closely related to Paiutes, less closely to Shoshone, Bannocks, and Comanches. Weenooch homelands included all the lands that they normally protected and regularly used. They used other lands for occasionally hunting and trading trips. Weenooch lands extended north of the San Juan River in what is now New Mexico and Utah to the San Miguel River in Colorado and the La Salle Mountains in Utah. The Continental Divide bounded their eastern range, and the Abajo Mountains in Utah make their western boundary. These lines were vague, not definite limits. Bands of Utes and other tribes shared border areas. Ancestors of the Ellen Canyon, White Mesa Utes, and Paiutes lived in the western part of Weenooch territory. The land use. Weenooch occupied these diverse, interesting and productive lands. They used the resources carefully. The Weenooch did not damage the resources' ability to reproduce and survive. The people did not overpopulate the region. They probably numbered less than 1,000. The people probably never met in groups larger than 100 or 200. To survive, the Weenooch followed a system of seasonal migration. Then, as well as all Utes were travelers. They moved about in patterns set by tradition and to a great degree by the weather. The Weenooch did not have a written calendar. The length of daylight, the temperature, and rainfall indicated when they should move and where they should go. They traveled in small groups, often not much larger than an extended family. By keeping the numbers in groups small, the Weenooch avoided overtaxing the land. The great changes in Weenooch life began when non-Indian cultures began intruding on Ute lands. The Weenooch lands were not the first threatened, but after non-Indians discovered minerals in the San Juan Mountains, the Weenooch summer home became one of the regions invaded by non-Indians. The loss of their summer home also meant the loss of most of their deer they could harvest. Then the other southern Ute bands were pushed northward and west by the non-Indian settlers. These bands of Utes put pressure on the Weenooch land. The Weenooch and other Utes were forced to look elsewhere for food. The great buffalo herds were destroyed, so teepees to the plains were not profitable. To survive, the Weenooch and other Utes had either to find new ways to make a living or rely on government rations. Rapid changes is difficult and societies generally avoid it. Slow alterations can be accepted and made, but sudden, great changes in a traditional way of life are avoided whenever possible. Too much of a culture is destroyed by such changes. The period of great changes was the half century between 1860 and 1910. During that period, the Utes were restricted to reservations, which were all but a small part of their original lands. Some Utes were removed from the lands their ancestors used. The northern Utes were gathered into the Uinta Basin. The southern Utes occupied the part of what has been the Weenooch lands. In the period of transition, the Weenooch, as well as all the other southern Ute tribes, began to rely on the rations promised by the government in the treaties that also took Ute lands. During this period of despair and uncertainty, the population of Weenooch declined. It probably reached its lowest point in several hundred years. About the time the Ute Mountain Reservation was created in 1905, only 454 Weenooch were listed on the tribe's roll. The Weenooch themselves found that part of their winterlands was now their home. Oh man. I thought Lieutenant Governor mentioned when a person talks, they could talk for a long time. Boy, I guess somebody's stomach's growling. Let me just, I could make copies for people if they want to, if they're interested in this, and hand it out and you can read it at your own leisure. I just wanted to bring some things up from archives. And these are just things that we found. And Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. This is to the commissioner. And this is on education. This letter was written by Hickey William, a nephew of John Russell, and an Indian who had this habit for a long time of writing annoying letters to the office, to the superintendent of Santa Fe, where some of the youth